My father, Steve Menezes, was born in Petaluma, probably about 1892. When he came to New York, the first thing he did was go out and buy clothes and shoes because he didn't want to be labeled as an immigrant. I don't know how he learned more about the restaurant business, but he decided to open up a restaurant. One of his observations was running a restaurant is like going fishing. You have to have the right spot. He went to Richmond, California. Most of the town, maybe about 40,000 people, were factory workers. Standard Oil, Ford Motor Company, and a whole bunch of other factories. All were making decent salaries, and all were paying taxes. And they opened up a restaurant with Mr. Newley's down on the main street, a small restaurant. They did well, all during the World War II. And I went to school, and that was good because Richmond had one of the better school systems in the entire Bay Area.
They didn't come straight to San Francisco.
No.
They worked themselves all around.
And my uncle was knowledgeable, and he used to work for the Army and do interpret for them. And that's how they came all the ways out to, they went to Texas, and they went to quite a few other places. And then they came to San Francisco, and my uncle and my father had a tailor shop right across the street from the Emporium on Market Street. And they did very well. And then my father got married. He opened up a tailor shop and a cleaners on the Golden Gate Avenue, right up from the Golden Gate Theater.
My story is that my mother is from the island of Marmara, but my father is from the interior of Turkey. He was from the Black Sea in Samsun or Kerasunda. My father was born in the late 1800s. And my father was a blacksmith, came to America about 1904, and came through Ellis Island, ended up in Chicago, and again, I don't know why, came to Vallejo, California, which had the naval shipyard, and this had to have been at the beginning of World War I, where they were recruiting blacksmiths. So that's how he ended up on the West Coast and in the San Francisco Bay Area. They connected to say, so-and-so is now in San Francisco, come to San Francisco, you know, that kind of, I mean, now we have so many ways of communicating, but most of these people, their reading and writing was limited, so it just became almost like word of mouth that the Vardy clan was, you know, I mean, they just picked up the Tamarises. My mother knew the names and knew these people. With Daisy, who will be talking to you, her father and my mother knew each other as children. So we've spent several generations growing up together. It's just one of those, I think, unique situations where people know each other over that long of a lifetime.
My father had spent 14 years in San Francisco. As a single man. He was about 22 years old when he took a ship to San Francisco, but they would not let the sailors off the ships because they wouldn't come back. But my father was smart enough, he was a great swimmer, he could swim forever. He waited one night and he jumped off the ship into the bay and swam ashore. And there he started working and saving money to go back and marry a Greek girl from his village. And he was doing bussing tables and doing that, and he did go back. He married my mother, and he told her there's only one place to live in this world, and that's America.
When we lived in San Mateo, my father, it was during the Great Depression, and not having real command of the English language, or having no one to support him to go into like a restaurant, like most of the Greeks went into grocery stores, restaurants. He worked with his hands. He had a little carpenter shop. He worked at a lot of these beautiful homes up in Hillsborough, and he, his pastime was carving, and he made a replica of a Greek sadala that they had in Turkey. So this very wealthy man who owned a hotel in New York, who was from Asia Minor, heard about it. So he commissioned my father to build this little sadala, and it was in the New York Exposition in 1939. I'm not sure of the year.
39.
He had a brother that lived in New York and said, come to America and you can make some money and go back and marry. So he told my mother, I'm going to go to America and I'm going to come back after I have a lot of money to marry you. He was madly in love with her. They had a beautiful love affair. He came here, he was born in 1903, and he came here when he was like 16 or 17. Arrived at Ellis Island, and my Uncle Angelo met him at the ships and said, your fare was $50 and I expect you to go to work tomorrow and get a job. And of course he did look around and got a job as a dishwasher. He worked for several years and he decided to go back to Turkey to marry my mother. And so he went back in 1927 and they married and they came to New York. The whole time my mother wanted to live in Constantinople. She did not want to come to America. And my dad promised her that if he made enough money, they would go back and live in Turkey. Shortly thereafter, there was trouble. The war was going to break out. So the Turkish government said, you've got to leave. You're better off to, come back to America. So we came back to America. And we came to California at that time. We moved to San Francisco. And that's basically where we stayed. And we lived in the Richmond district, so the Tamarises were around the corner. Mary Zongas' family was 5 blocks away. So somehow, and it must be through the church, that we would meet the Marmarinoi. And we were just, like glue. We just fell into each other.
With all these people, they're like family. We all lived in the Richmond district except for Helen and Virginia, and Peter lived in San Mateo. And we were at each other's house all the time, visiting or eating. One mother would pick up the phone and say, what are you doing tonight? What are you having for dinner? Oh, we're having steak. Well, I think we're going to have hamburger. Let's get together. And that's the way it was. And the interesting thing is our kids have remained friends because of this bond. And of course, with my first cousins, they're not really my first cousins. They're my brothers and sisters.